Hey, everybody. Thanks for joining again, Thatcher Report. This is a bit of an experiment. I probably say that a little bit too much, but because it's Substack and because it's podcasting, there are no rules. I wrote an essay the other week called The Great Replacement of Theory, and it's about why the left is no longer dedicated to peaceful nonviolence in their protests and their activism, and in fact, they've become super violent. I wrote the essay, it was about 1,600 words. I thought it was great, but then I just felt like I could do it again, but shorter. So you're going to get the shorter version. I may wander around the point a little bit. We'll see. So this uh, version is called From Nonviolence to Intifada, the Left's Great Replacement of Theory. So obviously, I'm kind of making fun of the Great Replacement Theory, which is a complete nonsense, racist nonsense. But I'm seeing something on the left. So lately, the past many years, we've endured bloody language lessons in Arabic. The latest word that we've learned is intifada. That was once a relatively obscure term that was calling for Palestinians to kill Jewish civilians, especially women and children. But now it's widened in scope. Quote unquote, globalize the intifada means the entire world is a free fire zone. And so, therefore, the left are warriors waging a battle for social justice everywhere against everyone. So that explains a few things. That forget about keffiyehs. It doesn't matter if the protesters tend to wear keffiyehs nowadays in the streets, but even if they don't, if they have nothing to do with Palestine, the left is increasingly violent. This is what links the Black Lives Matter riots to what we saw in Minnesota with a takeover of a church, mayhem in the streets that tragically led to 2 deaths. We had the assassination of Charlie Kirk, attacks, physical and intimidation and cancellation, all types of attacks on Jews everywhere they live in this country, in all the different states. We've obviously had multiple assassination attempts on Trump, which is just something we've never seen before in this country in my lifetime, time and time again, trying to kill the president. And then for the New York tri state area, we've had really violent anti ICE protests in Newark. People are showing up with gas masks. They're not fighting ICE, they're fighting the New Jersey State Police because the governor created a perimeter around this detention facility. And so they just fight with the police, which are like their own people. No matter what you think about ICE or not, fighting your own staties is pretty crazy. It's also why in 2025, during all the protests, 2024, 2025, all the protests at Columbia University and most elite schools, students beat a janitor. And then later they demanded delivery of vegan food. So think about that for a second. And these students felt that they were being morally coherent. Of course, they're vegan and they're going to kick the shit out of a janitor who got in their way from taking over a building. So this is my question. How did the left shift from 1960s peaceful civil disobedience to what we're seeing now, which I can only describe as Islamist inspired violence? We're just not seeing, we've always seen like far right wing militias and they a lot of cosplay and they walk around in their uniforms and they pretend they're in some kind of paramilitary or something. And we've always seen far right wing violence. There was a lot of violence in the 1960s. It wasn't coming from the civil rights movement, but we've always seen that, but thankfully it's been relatively small. And we obviously saw January 6th, which was crazy. And that was just an awful thing. And that was certainly coming from the right wing. And one person died, I think, and then lots of cops are injured. The whole thing was just a disaster, horrible. But we're kind of used to seeing far right violence, although small. But now what we're seeing is left wing violence kind of everywhere around this country, from guns to beating police to shootings. And then also what I think of as kind of violent language, hate speech, and all the things that Jews are typically assaulted with. There's been lots of killings of Jews. Elderly people were set on fire in Boulder, Colorado. There's been violence everywhere. There was a massive terror attack I'm going to get to in Michigan that could have killed hundreds of people. Uh, but what we're definitely seeing is like lots of intimidation. And I've dealt with it too. I've talked about it before, but I had my altercation with pro-Palestinian activists and they were screaming at me and it was super scary. But that's, so my point is that this left-wing violence is increasing and it's everywhere in this country that you would find left-wing people, Minnesota, New York area, California, the Midwest, places like that. So how did this shift happen? You know, I'm of a certain age, as they say, I'm in my 50s, I'm Gen X. I grew up hearing about how amazing the civil rights movement was. But now it's like a very different terrain. And what I think and why I'm writing about this is because the media can't analyze this. They just can't. They can't talk about it in a way that I find convincing. And they almost never mention it because they use accusations of Islamophobia to insulate liberal violence from criticism. You'll hear lots of criticism of right wing people in the media, and all violence should be criticized and banished. But you just can't see popular discourse about left wing violence because they use this crazy concept of Islamophobia to insulate them. And that further it makes them unable to link the rise of left wing violence with the rise of pro Palestinian activism and the rise of all these many new Muslim politicians. They are very far left progressives. There was just another one, won a primary in New Jersey after I wrote my essay, who has positive contacts with the blind sheikh of the original Al Qaeda attacks in the World Trade Center. These, almost all of them, I think every single new Muslim politician is a progressive. Maybe there's one exception that proves the rule. And they make eradicating the Jewish state, which obviously means you have to kill millions of people who live there because it's a state in an area where no surrounding countries can tolerate non-Muslim sovereignty. These politicians, these Muslim progressive politicians, they prioritize eradicating the Jewish state, killing all the millions of people. And this is their main policy goal and litmus test if you're with them or not as a progressive. And it's very extreme, but you see it as the mayor of New York City. We just had the Israel Day Parade, which is kind of like the Jewish parade. There's a Puerto Rican parade, West Indian parade. There's all types of parades in New York City. St. Patrick's Day for all our various ethnic groups, Columbus Day for Italians. So the Jews have an Israel Day, and the mayor didn't show up. And he was said, I'm not going to go. I'm just not going to go. Most Jewish city in the country. Obviously, he has millions of them as constituents. Doesn't care. Because destroying Israel is much more important to him. Now, these progressive Muslims, they target, quote, Israel and Zionism, and they're supported in this by other Democrats. It's not like they're just this fringe group and people are like, oy vey, I wish they weren't here. Obama rallies with Zoran Mamdani. And obviously, firebrands like AOC, who doesn't know anything about the Middle East, are all in on this. What does this mean? It dissolves the boundary between progressives like AOC and super centrist establishment normie politicians like Barack Obama. They're all in solidarity. What are they in solidarity for? Well, they have a common enemy. It rhymes with you. And okay, so why is this happening? This is really crazy. This is not what we would expect from the left wing, which tells us they're about justice and they hate racism and they want to help poor people. Why all the violence? Why is this rising with new Muslim politicians and with this fixation, I can only call it a fixation, on Palestine? Well, the elites who form our narratives, these are the editors, journalists, opinion writers, the broadcast media, all the people in the legacy media, which is still quite powerful, they tell us that Muslims are double marginalized. First, they're considered people of color, and they're considered religious minorities. All right, there are billions of Muslims in the world. They have numerical superiority, on par with Christians. That's kind of the planet. You got Christians and Muslims. Those are the big numbers. Obviously, there's India and China. So they're in it, but they don't really preach and expand their borders. It's not like they're converting people to Hinduism or to Confucianism. But Islam, they're on the march. Christianity used to be too, obviously. So are they religious minorities? I don't know. Doesn't make any sense. And what does this mean, people of color? What is of color? You can't say colored people, right? That's wrong. But you can say of color. That's okay. That's safe to say. What does that mean? Now, really, when you say somebody's a colored person or they're a person of color, that always meant Black people. And then later on, maybe Latinos too. And it's a crazy term from like the 19th century related to slavery, obviously, not only in America, they used it in South Africa, all over Europe. It's, it's an old term. It's a scary and weird way to think about humans, to look at their melanin content, because in many cultures, there are people with wide ranges of skin color, like in China or among Jewish people that I know about, or like, I don't know, in Brazil or something. It's kind of a crazy term, but there is no such thing as a people of color, right? There's not like a colored peoplehood, right? People of color is this invented term that just means non-white. You got to look at the opposite to try to understand these things sometimes when there's these new innovative terms. It just means non-white. There's no peoplehood of Chinese Americans, Native Cherokees, and like a Syrian immigrant. Like they'd have nothing in common except for maybe being in America, but it's just POC, people of color, is just a term that's used to demote white people in the workplace, in politics, culture, and the academy, and probably other places too. They're just saying, oh, we need to have more people of color playwrights at our theater production. Okay, so therefore you're going to have to demote some white uh, playwrights. That's what that is. It's just a function. Whether you agree with it or not, obviously I don't agree with that. I don't think racism is good, but that's what the function is. And so they're using, the dominant media, use this term for Muslims, people of color. And then they also say that they're marginalized, or I'm saying they're double marginalized, but they're marginalized. Okay, what does that mean? What does it mean to be marginalized? What is the definition of this term? Well, again, you have to look at the opposite, which is privileged, right? This is another invention. Like people of color is just an invented term that really doesn't mean anything. And like people of color, it seeks to divide humans, right? There are some that are people of color, they're kind of better. And then there are some that are white, they're kind of worse, right? And then there are marginalized people. This is the confusing part. Marginalized people, we used to use the term minority. They are kind of worse because they're like victims, but that makes them kind of better. Like it's kind of noble to be the victim, I guess, the underdog. Americans love an underdog. And then the opposite is privileged, and that they're kind of bad. That's kind of a bad thing to do. And it just divides up humans between marginalized, privilege, of color, and white. And it doesn't, you just talk about it, it doesn't make any sense for any amount of time, right? Obviously, I am more privileged than somebody who is less healthy than me and poorer than me, right? And then there are a lot of people who are much wealthier than I am. And let's say, and certainly, hopefully for them, they're in better health. I have some of my own issues now. And so therefore, I am both marginalized and privileged at the very same time. Like, guess what? 100% of human beings. There's nobody at the very bottom who's the most marginalized. There's nobody at the very top who's the most privileged. You know, Elon Musk, rich guy, seems like he has a complicated family life. I don't know. Does that make him marginalized or privileged? It's just dumb. So, for example, in our political realm, Hillary Clinton and Kamala Harris, according to this insane taxonomy by liberals, are considered marginalized because they're women. Or Kamala Harris is even better. She's triple marginalized because she's a woman, she's Black, and she's Indian. Whoa, that's 3 layers all at once, man. That's amazing. We better put her to the top of the ticket, even though she's objectively not a great politician, not very charismatic, doesn't speak very well, and objectively couldn't earn votes in primaries. And guess what? She couldn't earn enough votes in a general election either. So they're marginalized as women, but yet they have vast wealth. Hillary Clinton is loaded. Kamala Harris is loaded, and they're super powerful, right? I have this tiny little Substack and podcast. Boy, anytime either one of these women says anything, millions of people know about it instantly. Or you have my favorite mayor of New York City, the most racist mayor that in my time of living in New York. He's a scion. He's a rich heir, Zohran Mamdani. Now, he's perceived as a victim of crippling Islamophobia. In the New York Times, there was one article after another about how hard his life has been, what a struggle because of Islamophobia. Now, if he was a victim of harassment for being Muslim or being South Asian, of course, that's terrible. Nobody likes a bully. But, he seems like he's doing okay. I'm just going to look at him objectively. He spent his entire life in elite schools. He had a really exciting international background, lived in different countries. I don't think he was ever hungry or lacked health care. He never needed a job. He's never had a real private sector job. He was like a rapper, and then he was an assembly person. Now he's one of the most famous politicians in America. And speaking of which, when he isn't hanging out with Barack Obama, guess who he pounds Diet Cokes with in the Oval Office? This guy is amazing. How many people hang out with Obama one day and Donald Trump the next? Not that many people. That's Zohran Mamdani. Is he marginalized? Really? So how does that work? How does that work? If I don't know if he's in the top 0.1%, but he certainly comes from a wealthy family and doesn't need money to survive. And Hillary Clinton is like in the stratosphere of wealth. And all three of these people, Harris, Clinton, and Mamdani, all know their way around the White House. So how are they marginalized? It's crazy. These paradoxes don't make sense unless you don't think of them as logical inferences about humanity. You just think of them as beliefs. They're like religious beliefs. We believe that some people are marginalized or privileged. We believe that there are people of color from people of color land, I guess. And then there are these white people and they're kind of bad. And we just hold these beliefs close in our hearts. Now, why would anybody believe any of this stuff? I don't know, but I like trying to be a little reductive to provoke the thought that it doesn't make any sense, right? Now, the observation is, why is this happening? Why is this happening on the left? Liberals replace Christianity, and to a lesser degree, Judaism. I don't know when, in the end of the 20th century, right? 1990s, 1980s, something like that, the trend started to turn. And they now have a different religion. They don't have Christianity anymore. They don't, the tiny minority of Jews in this country, they don't have Judaism. They have what what the media wants us to call it is identity politics, which I don't think is a really good term. It doesn't really mean anything. I don't know what that means. It's really about genetic favoritism. Based on genes, we can tell if somebody is a person of color or white just by looking at them. And we can also tell, therefore, and then you look at gender and sexuality for the things, whether or not they're marginalized or privileged. It's a genetic argument. Because they don't look at income, clearly, Zohran Mamdani or Hillary Clinton. So they're not looking at that. They're not looking at geography. They're not looking at educational levels. They're not looking at skill sets or if their bodies work or not. It's genetics. It's horrifying, but that is the core of the left religion right now. And you call it identity politics. We'll say, oh, my identity is I'm a Latina lesbian woman, so I have these particular privileges that I need. Or I'm a Jewish person or a Black person or disabled or whatever. It's all about their identities, but that's all genetic, right? So based on birth status, it's like, did I ask to be born the way I am? Does that have anything to do with my moral behavior or lack thereof? I don't think it works that way. And what's more frightening among the liberal creed of this genetics is that all of their policies have to serve these divisions. Remember, these genetics are the concept of the genetics are to divide people, right? There are better people and worse people. And these divisions is why liberals still in 2026 can't get away from DEI or trans issues, for example. Right? They don't poll well. Everybody knows they don't poll well. That's not a debate in this country anymore. Some people have stronger feelings about DEI maybe, but it doesn't poll well. There's been lots of constitutional jurisprudence about affirmative action is illegal. And California has voted against affirmative action in the state level. So you can look at the judiciary and you can look at popular elections, state elections, certainly. And you can just say DEI is not as popular. If you put it on a ballot at the national level, which I know doesn't really work that way, although Trump did win and he's certainly anti-DEI. So there you go. Or trans issues, right? Which are like much more niche. But the left, liberals, the Democrats, they can't get away from DEI or trans. They know that they should, but they can't, because it's not about popularity. It's about justice. And justice is a made up kind of term, unfortunately. Like I believe in God. I believe in the 10 Commandments. I believe in universal morals, right? That there are some things that are just wrong and there are some things that are just right. And it's really hard to figure them out sometimes, and you need to think about it a lot, and you have to have a legal tradition, maybe going back a couple thousand years can help, or 250 years in our case, but we lean on British common law too. It's really tricky to find right from wrong sometimes, but it does exist, right? But justice, kind of a flexible term. So this is what's happening with liberals, is that the terms marginalization and of color are as impossible to define as a belief in an invisible entity who has a thing for Middle Eastern real estate, because by definition, belief is not provable, right? I do believe in this invisible identity, but I'm not going to have a logical argument about it with somebody, because I'll lose that argument, because it's completely illogical. And it's not about logic. It's about my sense of the creation of the universe and what our mission is on this planet and what the meaning of life is. I mean, that's kind of subjective to different people. I think I'm right, but somebody might disagree with me, and that's fine too. Like they should do whatever they want, but you can't prove it, right? So these, but I can judge them, right? I judge uh, certain beliefs as off the mark. Like I think monotheism is a great innovation over pantheism, because it does establish universal morality and the equality of all people. And it's a whole long conversation of why there's sort of a technological advantage to monotheism, and why Jews invented it, discovered it, realized it, whatever verb you want to use, around 1500 BC, and it caught fire over the years, right? It took a while, but it caught fire across this planet, because it's a really interesting idea that really fixes many things to believe in one God. But nevertheless, it's just a belief. It's just a belief. And the liberal belief of marginalization, privilege, of color and white, and that there's all these justice issues, it also that serves a really important social function. It lets liberals see themselves as fundamentalist freedom fighters. Only they know the truth. Everyone else is an evil racist, right? This gives them also an epic narrative that imbues their life with meaning. The stakes are high. They're reluctant heroes, risking it all to join the fight. And this, to me, explains why there's so many gaps and omissions in the media and weird fixations. So the media, the mainstream dominant legacy media, did not cover Biden's health decline. It was a big surprise. Later, we learned out that there was kind of a conspiracy. It's certainly within the White House, but I think within editors and journalists, and it's just the biggest story that never gets reported. And it's also why they didn't report, the media, why mRNA vaccinations are unrelated to viral transmission. We were kind of told conflicting messages, but we never got the story. There's a lot of COVID that you can look to as an example of this, or like the Wuhan lab theory, which seems pretty possible, pretty likely that COVID came from a lab, but the media doesn't report on certain things, or prevaricates or fixates, like on Israel instead of all the other countries on the planet, because they are warriors in a epic battle, and they have to win because they know the truth, and everybody else who doesn't agree with them does not know the truth. And it's like the Crusades. And I know that sounds really strong, but I have no other way of seeing this. And I encounter this all the time with liberal people in my life in New York, where they are just like shaking their head and tut-tutting at my new insights after October 7th, and after COVID, and after Kamala Harris's disastrous election, and after costs just keep on going up to the point where being middle class in this country is not possible, and after just seeing all of our infrastructure crumbling and nothing new being built in this country, whereas in other countries, democracies and non-democracies, they get lots of new things. Israel has better infrastructure at the municipal level than America does. That's kind of crazy. Dubai, don't even get me started about Dubai. That's like a whole nother level. And it's the media is not about reporting news. They might have been at one point, but no longer. They're fundamentalist freedom fighters, right? This is a battle. Obviously, they didn't want Biden to lose. They wanted Trump to lose. So that's why they didn't cover uh, his decline. Like COVID, I don't really understand why they wanted COVID, why they thought children could get COVID. It was really crazy. But they had all these counterfactual beliefs, and their beliefs. You can't really question them. Another example of this is Ayman Ghazali. All right. He's the guy who drove a car packed with explosives and he had guns into a Michigan synagogue full of children because it was in the middle of the day. It's the country's largest Reform synagogue, which is the country's largest Jewish movement. So it's a lot of people, hundreds and hundreds of kids in this childcare center. This man, Mr. Ghazali, is a terrorist. That's all you need to know. Muslim guy, doesn't matter what his religion is, he happens to be a Muslim guy, drove his car into a building with lots of children. And he wanted to kill them. He was targeting them because of their ethnicity, right, as Jews. That's it. Terrorist. Hate crime, terrorist. End of story. Well, the mainstream media, NPR really did a job on this, but other more normal outlets, they went which are not really news outlets. Sorry, I have to correct myself. They're really liberal advocacy groups because they have a single point of view that I think is a religious point of view, and they're going to make that point with their quote unquote privilege of publishing and having access to the airwaves. They rushed to explain that Ayman Ghazali's brother, that since his brother had been killed by the IDF in Lebanon because he was a Hezbollah member, it's kind of understandable that Ghazali wanted to murder Midwestern children named Rebecca and David, right? He was really angry and upset at Israel. And it's so crazy to think of it that way from a moral perspective. But the Michigan, now, and since then, he's won his primary. The Michigan Democratic senatorial candidate, actually, I take that back. I don't know if he's won his primary or not, but he's a front runner, is Abdul Al-Sayed, right? He's a much longer name, but that's what he goes by in this country. He's in Michigan. He's running for Senate as a Democrat. He wrote a long statement, which I read after that attack, which was in March. And basically he said, hurt people, right? So this guy is running for Senate. This is not like a dog catcher, right? This is a major political figure. And even if he loses, he's still a major political figure. How many people run for Senate? It's like maybe 1,000 people in the whole country. He explained away terrorism, right? He explained it. He just says, kind of, it's bad, but it kind of makes sense because his brother, who was a Hezbollah terrorist, was killed by the IDF during a war, right? It's kind of like that's kind of the deal. If you're like a Hezbollah member, you're going to risk your life. And what El Sayed, who's an American citizen, born and raised in Michigan, he kind of is giving a form of consent to this terrorism, right? Because he understands it. And he wrote a big, long statement about how it's bad, it's so bad, and then he understands, right? That's not what you're supposed to do as a moral person. You're just supposed to say it's bad. That's it. And then if you're the attorney general or district attorney, you go after that person. And if they really were guilty, if they were found to be guilty by a judge and a jury, then they should go to jail for the rest of their lives or be killed or whatever the punishment is. But you don't try to understand it. There's nothing to understand about trying to kill a building full of children. There's just nothing. Was there something to understand about Oklahoma City bombing? No, I don't care anything about what Timothy McVeigh had for breakfast that day or if his father beat him or not. He's a terrorist. That's it. That's it. No more conversation. Well, it's not a mistake that Abdullah Sayed is a Muslim Democrat, which therefore means he's a far left progressive, and he's kind of okay with terrorism. And it's terrible that this is what's happening. I don't think this is good for Muslim people at all, that this is what's happening. But there are no Muslim politicians on the right. There just aren't. There's Mehmet Oz, Dr. Oz, but he didn't win his race. And yeah, he's a politician. There's one, Turkish. But all of the Muslim politicians right now in this country are progressive. And it's very, very, very disconcerting. But it embodies what I'm talking about, right? Which is, there's a new value system that's taken over the left, right? when you apply these beliefs of these crazy beliefs that you can't prove, that make no sense, of marginalization, privilege, of color, when you apply that to Islam and to Muslims, you discard the Western Judeo-Christian values that essentially says all people are created equal, right? We're all created in God's image. That means no man is born better than any other man. We're all the same, right? This is a really good idea. It's animated this country for 250 years. It's a very important concept. Instead, since the left discards that, they don't say all people are created equal anymore. They're like, well, there's kind of, if you have more melanin content in your skin, if you're queer, you're kind of better. You're kind of worse off. So therefore, we have to make you kind of better. It's this crazy seesaw of humans, and it means that you cling to violence. Violence is okay now because you're in this epic battle. You're trying to save the world against these really evil, racist, fascist people. So if you got to kill some people along the way, it kind of makes sense. And if your brother was killed thousands of miles away from the same ethnic group of people, well, their kids are targets. That's fair, right? I mean, it is a very, very, very problematic trend, but I don't see it ending because the left has inoculated themselves from introspection. They can't question it, right? Because they're so deep into the belief system. So we're also told, to adding to this fire of marginalization and of color and adopting what I think are these kind of more Muslim, Palestinian Intifada kind of behaviors. It's not all Muslims, it's not all Islam, but obviously the antagonists on the planet right now. Right now, the antagonists are radical Muslims. That's what we're dealing with in Iran. That's what Al Qaeda, ISIS, all over the Middle East. Those are the bad guys fighting Western civilization, and they're really helpful because they say we're fighting Western civilization. You can kind of take them; they're not stupid. You can take them for their word. But why would that have anything to do with what's happening in America? Well, we're also told that democracy is endangered. Right. The media says constantly the democracy is endangered. Well, is it endangered? In America, the Democratic Party, over, I guess, a 12-year period, they fielded 3 candidates. 2 of them were not very popular, Hillary Clinton and Kamala Harris. They weren't very popular, and they lost. Hillary Clinton, yes, she won the popular election, but she lost the Electoral College, which just means that in the key swing states, she just wasn't popular enough to lose, and that gave Trump a huge mandate in the Electoral College. It's a crazy system. I don't like the system, but that's our system. Hillary Clinton went to Yale Law School. She knows it better than I do. She just wasn't popular enough, and she lost. That's it. She got more votes because, like in California and Massachusetts, New York, places like that are enthusiastic for her. But in Michigan and other states where Wisconsin, she just didn't get enough. It was a 70,000 votes. It was nothing, but you needed 71,000. She didn't get them. Obviously, we know about Biden. Had we known really what his health situation was, maybe he would not have won, but we'll never know. And then the Democrats fielded Kamala Harris. Remember, she's triple marginalized. That's really the only reason I can think of. I didn't agree with it at the time, but now I see it this way. That's the only reason I can think of that she was there. Obviously, she helped Biden in South Carolina, and there's, realpolitik. But when she was, what was it called? It was like her Joy campaign or something, Good Vibes. It was the politics of joy, which is absolutely meaningless, especially when you don't have a job and you're broke. The Democrats fielded 2 unpopular candidates and they lost. And now they say democracy is in danger. Well, maybe democracy is working how it's supposed to work, and Americans vote for who they think is a better candidate. It seems like it's working to me. But no, they say we've lost democracy. So what does that make you want to do? Well, if you live in America and you want something, and if you're told the democracy isn't working, so your vote doesn't matter, maybe you should pick up a gun because the vote doesn't matter. The whole thing goes apart. The whole compact, the whole social compact Rousseau writes about, it all goes apart if you say there's no more democracy when there is a democracy. Now add to this another layer of the pseudo-academic concept of intersectionality, right? which, like Islam, enforces a totalitarian worldview. You must believe the totality of our ever-shifting beliefs: anti-ICE, pro-trans, there's a climate emergency, you have to have children masking and vaccinated, whatever it is. If you disagree with any of it, with a single item, then you are worse than wrong, you're dangerous, and you must be stopped. So you have the rise of Islam in liberal politics. You have this crazy idea of intersectionality. We're told democracy is in danger, and we're told there are marginalized people and privileged people, and it's really clear. You just have to consult a blood test of their genetics to figure it out, right? Well, that's why people start acting violently, because these beliefs encourage them to be violent. And I don't go too deep into this in the essay, but Islam is big, right? I don't know the number. It's like 1.5 or 2 billion Muslims. I couldn't possibly, it's totally unfair and inaccurate to try to generalize it, right? You have this billions of people all believing different things, and there's all these different strains within Islam, right? There's the two big ones, Shia and Sunni, but there's lots and lots of traditions within them and subgroups and all types of confusing stuff. But the Muslims that I think are worthy of paying attention to are the radical Islamist Muslims, who are the ones with different flavors, the Shia flavor, the Sunni flavor. Those are the radical ones that are in power in Iran. The radical ones created Al-Qaeda and ISIS and Hezbollah and all these, and Hamas, right? And all the ones in Africa, Boko Haram, which means books are forbidden. How's that for a group? And Al-Shabaab and all these other groups. So they're not the majority of Muslims. And I know when I say a Muslim politician, it sounds like super like, wow, Zachary's really off the deep end. But I'm talking about the main players within the religion, the main powerful guys who are pulling the levers, right? And these are the radicals. There's different types of radicals. These are the radicals, but they have a totalitarian worldview. This is what's important to understand. They have the Muslims and everybody else. And it's like Dar al-Islam and Dar al-Harib or something, which the land of Islam and the land of the sword, because it's the same word in Hebrew, basically, Harib. And it's like, we're going to kill all those people. And if you studied the Inquisition in the 15th century in Spain, that's what it's like now for the radical Muslim. I'm not saying every Muslim believes this. I'm an optimistic person. I think most people just want to go home and play with their kids after a day of work and eat something good and not have the rain come in to their house when it's raining. I think it's kind of that for everybody. But nevertheless, Islam has radical Islam, which is very motivated. There's oil money and there's lots of people who believe in it. And also in Islam, there hasn't been a reformation, right? Christians murdered each other for a very long time with the rise of Protestantism. And it was warfare and mayhem all over Europe until finally they stopped. And they stopped. It took them a really long time, but they stopped, right? Islam is a newer religion. It's from around 700 AD. So it's just a new 642 maybe, but it's just a newer religion. That was still a long time ago, but it's not as long ago as Christianity. And they are still fighting a fundamental battle between who should succeed Muhammad. They believe is the prophet. He died. He's a man. They believe he's a man. It's not like Christians. But their guy died too. And Muhammad died. And who succeeds him? They're still fighting about this. That's the Shia Sunni divide. And they spend a lot of time killing. It's not all of people. I'm sure most Muslims are like, all right, okay, we have our traditions. It's fine. We don't really care what the other guys do. But enough people are fighting that it's a disaster all over the Muslim world. There's no really peaceful places. Like there's no democracies or anything like that, except maybe Indonesia for the past 10 years. So you add that kind of political framework, which is not a Western framework. It's not the Judeo-Christian framework. It's the Muslim framework. And you add that, we're told there's no democracy. We're told intersectionality. We're told white people are bad. We're told there's a peoplehood of colors from all color peopleistan, and they're all the same, and they're against, or they're better, and the whites are bad. You're told all this stuff, all this intersectional stuff. So you have to believe in every single little thing. And if you don't, you should die. Basically, it just creates a permission structure to hurt people. How did this happen? Okay, I'm going to wrap, I promise. How did this happen, right? In the 1950s, in the civil rights movement, Black leaders, almost all of them, were men of faith. Martin Luther King Jr. famously was literally a reverend. Malcolm X, on a different side of it, was a clergy member in the Nation of Islam until he left. There are many, 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 many powerful, interesting, intellectual Black leaders who studied the Bible. They were experts in the Bible. They also were really good at the Hebrew Bible. The Christians obviously have kind of two books. Anyways, I'm not going to get into it, but many Black leaders found resonance in the Hebrew Bible, which talks, of course, that it's 5 books. 4 of the books are about escaping slavery and in Egypt and becoming free, and then becoming moral and getting moral laws from God and manifesting that freedom in Israel. It's a really amazing, dramatic story from degradation to redemption. It's beautiful. It's very moving. It's moved billions of people. It's a great story. I'm a fan. These men, these Black leaders, I'm sure there are women too who are into it. They were deep into Western Judeo-Christian values. They lived that life, and they took Mahatma Gandhi's focus on a tactical idea of nonviolent civil disobedience, which Gandhi used to free India in 1948 from the British Empire, same year that the British left Palestine and Israel was formed. But the point is that the civil rights movement combined the moral authority of the Bible, where everybody in this country at the time, in the 1950s and the 1960s, they all knew their Bible. It was not like now where people don't really study it, or they kind of think it's ridiculous, or they sort of begrudge it. They're not really so familiar. Back then in America, people had a more classic Western education. The text of Western thought is the Bible. And then, there's Greek thought too, but certainly the Bible is a key text. And then they took Gandhi. Now, Gandhi had just been successful just a few years earlier. This was like the most happening thing in the world after World War II. And they took the morality of nonviolence, the moral authority of the Bible, and they used that in the civil rights movement to protest and to litigate, and people died and they were hurt and there was blood in the streets and there was terrible violence, and obviously Martin Luther King was killed, Malcolm X was killed, all these important leaders, John F. Kennedy, Robert Kennedy. It was a crazy, crazy time. But the civil rights movement people, I think, were on the right side of history because they were moral and they had a vision and they had a shared narratives of the Bible, and they won. And I looked it up. I was talking about it earlier with a friend, but I looked it up. I never thought about the Civil Rights Act in 1964. Was it a squeaker in Congress or not? That law passed with overwhelming bipartisan majorities. Overwhelming. We don't see anything like that in contemporary politics. Now, very liberal people moan and complain and kvetch that right now America is systemically racist. I don't even really know what that means, but we have structural racism, everything is racism, and everything is so terrible right now. It's Jim Crow 2.0, and the Voting Rights Act is being limited, and now we're going to go back to like 1860 or something. But no matter if they're wrong, I think they're overstating the case. But whatever they're saying, can you imagine what it was like in this country in 1964? Like, it must have been pretty freaking racist. And this thing passed, right? So all I'm going to observe is that the civil rights movement had a really brilliant strategy and tactics, and they just worked. Well, unfortunately, that was then. Now, the left has replaced the Bible. They're not interested in the Bible anymore. They're not grounding themselves in the Bible and Christianity and church attendance. That's on the right now. Those are the right-wing people. They're ones who talk about Christianity. And who's talking about Gandhi on the left? I mean, I sound like a million years old talking about Gandhi. Nobody talks about Gandhi and civil disobedience, nonviolent civil disobedience. What we have now is Islamist violence, an intifada, and we have unprovable ideas about genetics and identity. This has been a great replacement of theory that the left has suffered. They swapped out Martin Luther King for Palestinian militancy that demands intersectional compliance and a very confusing belief that you're supposed to privilege marginalized people. And if you don't agree with them, you're wrong and you should be eliminated, right? You should be hurt. It's okay. You can hurt a cop. You can burn something down. You can try to shoot a Jewish child or light an elderly Jew on fire or intimidate them at their synagogues because, they're not doing intersectionality correctly or in DEI and marginalization. You are, and you're right, and they're wrong, and they should be taken out of the picture. And there's no democracy, so why vote? You don't need to vote. You just punch them in the face as hard as you can. So this is a moral inversion. I really believe in my heart that the civil rights movement was morally correct, and I think most Americans agree because a piece of legislation passed with bipartisan majorities in the 1960s. That's one way of measuring sentiment, right? If enough politicians feel like they can vote for something and they're not going to lose their power, well, there's probably a lot of people who agree with it. But what we're seeing now is upside down. And the left is no longer moral, or they're not moral in a way that I think is moral. They have a perversion of morality, which excuses violence and militancy, and it's not a coincidence that that's happening with the rise of pro-Palestine. I don't know if you watch this stuff on TV or see the images, but when you see these anti-ICE protesters in Newark, a lot of them are wearing keffiyehs to obscure their faces, but they're also sending a signal. Excuse me. This is like an intifada. This is like their fight, man. Like Palestinians are in the streets throwing rocks at these terrible Israeli white supremacists, and they're getting mowed down. And sometimes they score some hits, like on October 7th, and that was awesome. But mostly they're just victims, and they're getting killed for no reason when they're throwing rocks and shooting and driving buses into buildings and blowing up pizza restaurants. But we're doing that here, man. Like we see what's happening in Jerusalem and Tel Aviv and Gaza. We're going to do it in Newark, right? Because ICE is bad. Fuck ICE. And they're bad. And we can tell you why they're bad because of intersectionality and marginalization and so on. Now, the fact that a lot of the police officers are Latino or Black or obviously blue collar, that's the one thing that's so fascinating about the pro-Palestine fixation is that it trumps all of that stuff. Like you can say, oh, I believe in marginalization and identity and genetics, and that determines everything, except when it comes to this kind of intifada thinking, then that wins everything. And then it's just a killing game. You can just kill and hurt as much as you want. So what I'll leave you with is let's look at the track record of this intifada activism versus the civil rights movement activism. We can just look at quote unquote Palestine. It's not really a country called Palestine, but nevertheless, let's say there is. Let's look at how is that working for the Palestinians. All right. If you don't like it, well, just imagine what it's due to America. It's scary and it needs to end. And the left wing needs to just go away. It just needs to reformulate itself with new ideas and new values. I'm not going to, I think I know what the policy ideas are. I think they're about your physical and national security, which involves borders and just policing and all those things. I think it involves infrastructure. I took an Amtrak train earlier this week. It's time travel to 1980s. The Wi-Fi doesn't work. The signage doesn't work. The trains are slow. They're physically old. Yeah, they're just, I think people don't like that. I'm not the only person who doesn't like that. We want even airplanes. Like, why can't airplanes go faster? Like, there's got to be ways to have advances in travel. That's just one example of infrastructure. And then things cost too much. Everybody agrees things cost too much. Nobody argues about this. This is not an argument. The right and the left all agree things cost too much. Well, Who has the best ideas to do something? I'm not saying only the right wing does, but I think trying to solve it is a big problem. Big, big, big problem why things cost too much. There's lots and lots of smart people who can tell you that there's 4,000 reasons why things cost so much, but we need politicians to come up with 4,001 ways not to have things cost too much. I think that's what the left should formulate itself on. And all of this genetic stuff and all of this marginalization, intersectionality, and yes, Palestinian cri de coeur, I don't think that that's what's working. And I don't think it's helping America. All right. Thank you so much for listening. Appreciate your time.